the use of applications, and primarily chatbot applications, to ask questions that tap into natural language processing capabilities in an application that access something called a large language model. These large language models are hosted by some really well-funded companies like Anthropic, OpenAI, Google, Meta, and their models are trained using what's known as deep learning against massive sets of data, like literally a snapshot of the internet. And the model reads that data by breaking it down into individual segments. Now, those segments can be partial words, they can be words, phrases, and those segments are referred to as tokens. And that's what the machine is really absorbing. It's absorbing these tokens. To say that an AI learns things, a Gen AI learns things, it doesn't really. It is just exceptionally good at relating the tokens that it knows with the tokens that you feed it in the form of a question. So it's doing that matching, and it makes it look like it is actually understanding all of this, where it's actually behind the scenes a giant matching of capability. Now, it's important to know that the large language models from OpenAI and Google and Meta, they don't live hunt and search on the internet. They have learned from its content. So like OpenAI's latest iteration was fed all of the internet data from April 30th, 2023 and backward. So don't ask it who won Wimbledon this year because it's not going to know. But it likes to answer questions. So it might just tell you if you ask it who won Wimbledon this year. It may pick someone that it thinks should have won Wimbledon, and it won't know the difference because it wants to answer your question. And it's also a very confident application. So it's going to say, Mary Jones won Wimbledon. Mary Jones may not have won Wimbledon this year, but it thinks it did because it was the logical assumption of the tokens that it matched up. So it's interesting what it can and can't do, because what it can do is spectacular when it's looking at the right things, but it can also make some really epic fails. But it's basically looking from a chatbot and making a question into a very, very heavily, largely trained model somewhere on the back end. And it will predict answers for you. That's Gen AI.
That's fascinating. So why all the hype? Is Gen AI really different from legacy AI? And are we right to be excited about that?
I think it is very different. And legal in particular should be very excited. First and foremost, Gen AI is a language-based set of models. And I can't think of any profession that is more language-based than the legal realm. So finally, we have an artificial intelligence that is almost built for the way we think and operate, and the currency of the realm, if you will, for our area of business. No longer do you have to have coding to access compute knowledge. You literally can access the compute knowledge with human conversation and tap into some very, very powerful amounts of information at that. And who speaks better than lawyers? We should be really well positioned to do this. However, we as lawyers can also be pretty obtuse in our communication. And other than like looking up published case law or that sort of thing, the large language models may not have actually learned that much about us, because a lot of what lawyers do isn't publicly available on the internet. So the large language model, while it's learned lots and lots and lots of things, it may not have learned that much about what lawyers do because it's not publicly available for it to learn from. So there's a good and bad to the fact that this is language-based and something that's going to be really exciting for our profession, but maybe isn't quite trained in everything we need it to know to be helpful for us. Now, the good part about that is that it is language-based. The double good part is you can still train it. just because the large language models have learned from the internet doesn't mean they stop learning. If you have an enterprise license with any of the large vendors, you can feed that model additional information so that it becomes better at what it needs to do for you. So, for example, Thomson Reuters, through Casetext, has trained the LLMs that it's working with on just a ton of published case law and a ton of unpublished case law, things that it has in its archive and library. Because of that, it is extremely good when you use their application version of giving you the rulings, extrapolating outcomes from different fact patterns, summarizing research, giving you reliable and cited research. It's able to do that because they have given that particular LLM and their application a very specific set of additional data that makes it very valuable. So the models are great, and they can be made even better for us, and they're very well suited to the language kind of processing that we do. So from that standpoint, I think legal should be very excited, but there's still a ways to go before we're going to get everything we need out of it.
So quick follow-up on this is perfect. Why are people skeptical in legal about Gen AI?
I'll take that one, Diane, if it's okay. So I think the reason is because with AI, there have been a lot of cycle of enthusiasm, but also disillusionment, right? With traditional AI coming into the place, there were a lot of expectations, and especially in the legal industry, there were a lot of expectations on how things that we could have done or we will be able to do with AI, right? Greater insights, drafting, communications, legal research memos, extraction of contracts, redlining and drafting. So there were, again, a lot of expectations of the things that AI was going to be able to help and provide in the legal space. So you have that peak of everyone really excited about this new technology. And that was the case for several years. But then, the drop of disillusionment came because, especially in the legal space, we start understanding all the limitations for actually leveraging AI. And we started to understand those use cases, limited use cases, where we could really leverage this technology. On top of that, we also start learning all the effort and the work that you needed to put in with this technology to also get some of the results that you were expecting, right? So training the models, fine-tuning these technologies, putting all your legacy contracts, but then having actually lawyers having to review the results of the AI, and then the frustration of some of these, individual contributors, especially lawyers, having to deal with these technologies that they didn't know how to utilize to actually then try to understand what the tool was giving them. So they would start feeling like this was more work than actually what they were receiving from the technology, right? So again, you had a hype, and then you have a very big low, if you will. So those are some of the reasons why we're seeing that, especially in the legal space, now we are more cautious about actually having another immediate hype with this new Gen AI. And it's worth to say that, of course, with traditional AI, we also had good use cases, and we were able at the end to leverage for very specific use cases. But still, now before having a huge or another peak or hype, I think in the legal space we're being more cautious to really see where are going to be the benefits of this new technology, and really see what's the potential in the legal space.
So just a follow up on that, Patty, like what can Gen AI do that is genuinely better than the tech that people have had previously? And is there any kind of specific use cases that you could talk about?
Well, I think I'm going to take that one, Colin. Gen AI, first and foremost, is genuinely better at learning. First of all, because it has a massive context for everything that it's looking at, because it has looked at the entire internet, it actually learns anything that goes on top of that very quickly. So many of us lived through the machine learning years, or what I like to refer to as the machine teaching years, because it seems like all we did was try and find examples and corner cases and variants so that a model could figure out the 4,000 different ways to express a limitation of liability clause. Gen AI is very different. There is actually a capability called one-shot learning, where if you ask it to learn a new topic, it literally can do so based on one example, because it's so good at matching that example to all the variant ways that the same construct of language could have been expressed in all of the ways it's seen language express things, that it can come back with all of those variants. It's really good at doing that. And that's a big leg up in having to deal with an AI. Anyone who lived through the labors of training the legacy AIs with machine learning and traditional examples, it's an arduous task. And now to be able to do that with literally one example and learn a whole new topic, or have it be able to really with exceptional accuracy return all the variations of something within a complex of agreements, awesome stuff. It's also very good at summarizing content. So it can read a massive file. And if you give it an instruction, you can ask it to summarize that massive file in 5 paragraphs. You can ask it to summarize it in 5 pages. You can ask it to summarize 5 sentences, 10 bullets, and it will do all of those things. And in a matter of seconds, it will turn that around. So if you've got large legal research, people out there with paralegals and first-year associates and things like that are out trying to summarize large case files, maybe summarize depositions, it's awesome at doing that kind of stuff, because it's going to read all of that and pull out the salient pieces and put them in an organized and logical fashion and do it in whatever parameter range you give it. So it's really good at that sort of thing. It's also very good at language translation. So for the first time, we actually have a computer intelligence out there that works almost as well in English as it does in Spanish and French and German and Japanese and Greek, certainly much better than anything we've seen in the past. And if you think about it, it makes sense, because there are millions of good examples in the internet of all of the variants of language against every other language that's out there. So it's really good at taking the tokens that it understands and then finding their equivalent in the other languages that are out there. So some of the things that we're used to really struggling with, Gen AI is going to give us a vast improvement on. But there are still some of the old problems. So if you're looking at a data set and you have bad scans, for example, poor OCR qualities, you have agreements with double columns, documents embedded in documents, those types of what I'd call more physical issues with data are still relevant as issues with these kind of machine learning models, because it's still reading from a machine read document of some sort. It's got to pull document information from somewhere. And so if you've got bad content going in, you're going to struggle with getting content out. So it's not perfect, but there are areas where it's really starting to make a difference.
So you mentioned content a lot, right? Doing summaries. Like, is it true that it can create content as well?
Yes and no. What it's really doing is predicting the next follow-on sentences that come from whatever you asked it. So if you ask for something, it's going to predict a response based on what it's seen out there in looking at the tokens, or the phrases, the sentences, the issues that you've asked it, and associating those with content out in the world that it understands. And it's going to come back with a variant of that. So what you get back may look like it's different. So for example, you ask it to create an illustration of for a children's book, and you want it to be cartoon animals. It's going to come up with cartoon animals based on the cartoon animals that it's seen out there. If you liked what you gave it and you said, this is good, but I want a variation on that, it'll stick with what it first found and then look for variants on that theme. If you say, no, I don't like that at all, come up with something completely different, it will try again to find the next closest thing. The problem is the more you object to it, the farther it's looking out, it may actually get further away from what you ask for. So if you ask for it to give you an illustration of the 3 bears, its first illustration might be actual bears. The second illustration might be cartoon bears. Then you ask for cute cartoon bears. It might give you stuffed animals. It's going to keep looking for things that it thinks are associated with what you've asked for, but it's actually looking at stuff that it's already seen. So you run into questions about, is this really creation? Now, there's a great philosophical debate you can have around this. Is compiling things and reconfiguring them really creation? Humans have struggled with that distinction in copyright law for years. We just now have a new player that's participating. So, and is very good at all of that compilation. But is it really its own creation? It's looking at an awful lot of stuff that has been fed to it by other sources, and those other sources are us. So hard to know whether it's really creating. But the definition of creation, I think, is open-ended.
Yeah. So last week I've seen a meme on LinkedIn that says, most people are spending, millions of dollars on AI initiatives, but the return on investment's a lot lower. But they got to do something, it seems like. So, everybody's getting pressured to launch a Gen AI initiative. But there are also a bunch of concerns being raised. From your experience, what are those concerns, and are those concerns real?
So I'm going to start with the one that Diane just mentioned. She just mentioned one that is around ownership, right? So again, you are going to be leveraging content that you don't know, that is going to be based on something else that the system is finding in the internet. It was created by someone else. So who owns the content that is being generated that you're going to be leveraging, right? Especially if you're going to, in the legal space, going to be using that content to produce other things. So one of the main concerns is around ownership and copyrights, and there's a lot of discussion around this and how then we're going to be able to treat this in the future, right? Another one that we have seen is biases, because at the end, the system can use or is being trained based on information that could also contain human biases, right? So you have a huge risk, again, of leveraging information and content that can be based on some biases of the training. So especially in the legal space, which is a very sensitive, space, there are concerns about producing content that could be biased and have, ethical concerns and like discrimination, or any other types of biases that could harm or could have an impact with the usage of the technology. And then another one that we have seen is, and this has also been a big topic, is hallucinations, because we have also seen that the tool is able to completely fabricate content. So you want to be careful of, leveraging content that seems, for example, if it's quoting a legal case, it's going to have all the structure and all the information to seem very real, but it could be completely fabricated, right? So you could have an issue of quoting this legal text, and if you're not really checking this information, you can be quoting or citing information that is not even real. So of course, in one way you can definitely leverage a lot of this, but in the other case, there are concerns about if you have to do, some checking around the accuracy and if it's the truthness around the information that is being given by the tool. I don't know, Diane, if you have anything to add around concerns.
I think the other one might be security. Everyone is worried about whether their data is going to go launched out into the internet and now become public information somewhere. I think that's the overblown concern. There are security questions, but it isn't that one. Basically, these AIs are trained on a snapshot of the internet, but they're not out roaming the internet to answer questions for you. They're not hooked up live to some feed to the public world. That isn't what they do. Even if your documents are sent over to a large language model for it to parse through and summarize or whatever, it's not retaining that data, or at least that's the commitment you're getting from the big players like Microsoft and OpenAI and Anthropic and Meta. And they have their entire reputations based around cloud systems today that have data and host data and are reliable and concern and basically are trusted. So it's not a whole lot different than in asking for that trust from them in these settings. The real security is whether you know what you're getting back, and are you putting the right humans in the loop to check the output to make sure that you're not getting fabricated data. And fabricated isn't the right word. The machine is doing its best to answer your question. And unless you tell it that don't make anything up, answer my question, but if you don't find a factual cited answer or something, then don't tell me that you can't find the answer. If you don't tell it that, it literally will say, it wants an answer, it wants an answer, let me make an answer. And so you have to, the security is really in your operation of it more than it is in the security of the exchange of data. Most of these applications, if you have, and I'm not talking about the free kind, if you're doing $20 a month on ChatGPT, all bets are off. But if you're doing an enterprise grade application API to one of the major players, they're going to send the data encrypted. They're going to delete the data once it's been read, and it's read in nanoseconds. So you're not going to see your exposure in those spaces, but you do have issues of security in how it's used, and what are you doing to check the outcome? Because ultimately, as a law firm, you're responsible.
So you brought up a great point there. Like, it's like, most people are using ChatGPT to begin with, right? But for companies, like, what are the enterprise plays that the folks could actually inquire about or use?
So what's interesting in the legal world, other than some of the law firms are actually incorporating the Gen AI into the delivery of their services, you may not even see it. They would just be using Gen AI with their junior associates to help summarize their memos and such. And they won't be sending client data out their doors, but they'll be using it on the inside to be able to do analysis and run things for you. So you're actually getting some of that benefit probably today from your larger law firms. You're also going to see all of your CLM tools introduce Gen AI as part of their suite of capabilities, whether they do it as a plugin from Microsoft Word, literally right into the Microsoft suite, or whether they do it as part of a CLM application that is going to have screens to do redlining for you or search that it leverages Gen AI to be more efficient against. Those are application areas where you're going to see it introduced that you don't have to do a whole lot, but there's good and bad that comes with that.
So when OpenAI announced ChatGPT on a Thursday, by the Monday we had 50 experts that were launching, right? All these vendors had to play with AI. They probably had machine learning first, now they're jumping into OpenAI, Gen AI. We know the dollars are being spent there, right? But what are some of kind of the low risk use cases that in-house teams could be looking at? Is it prompt engineering? What are the things that you've been seeing with some of your customers?
So, well, again, Diane just recently mentioned one, which is, legal research and memo drafting, which is a heavy lift, especially for junior associates. But we do see, and again, going back to what Diane was saying originally about being able to summarize really well with different formattings like bullet points, or taking pages of legal use cases and summarizing that, and even creating, the footnotes and quotings and all of that. So that will be definitely one of the use cases where we're seeing um, low risk and great improvements, and great use case to leverage the Gen AI. Then I guess another one, less, I guess I would say less typical, but for general communications, right? There's still work that you do for sending, memos, newsletters, internal communications in your companies, things again where you have low risk of, not only regarding or related to your specific data around your contracts, but also, low risk around hallucinations, or yeah, around the performance of the training modules. So that's another use case where we see that you can definitely start leveraging these technologies.
I'd imagine. Sorry, Patty. Sorry.
Yeah. No, I was just going to name another one, which is data abstraction, right? Again, depending on how broad you want this search to be, and also how sophisticated you want it to be, you might require a little bit more. It requires a little bit more effort than in other cases. But again, for summarizing contracts, for extracting specific contract terms, and this is again something different from what we used to see, right? With the prior AI, we were seeing that you have to have very specific terms for the AI to easily pick up those terms and give you very clean, very organized, and very structured data. And also, again, train and fine tune these models. With Gen AI now, by just, again, with the ability of now reading and summarizing and reviewing these contracts, now even if you don't have these specific terms in a very structured way, or in a very, with a specific formats, still the AI is going to be able to extract this information and provide it in a very summarized, in a very clean way. So I guess those are three of the very specific use cases that we're seeing that are, lower risk and good use cases to start leveraging the Gen AI.
I think we're probably going to see a lot of stuff, and correct me if I'm wrong, a lot of stuff kind of maybe starting in legal, coming into legal, like intake and triage, communications. There are probably going to be a lot of use cases around that as well. Would you agree with that?
Well, yeah, go ahead, Diane.
I completely agree, Con. Though basically we're actually leveraging more of the chatbot feature than we are the Gen AI. But the Gen AI is an interface to chatbots, so they go hand in hand. Chatbot is the vehicle with which we talk to the Gen AIs.
And then just are you seeing any companies, like I've heard a couple of things where folks are kind of training it, right? Training the Gen AI to work with their data sets in house, and how to, like, the prompt engineering to do, like, if it's around your contracts or reviewing your contracts, first review, stuff like that. Are you seeing a lot of that stuff as well?
Absolutely. There's basically two ways to make a Gen AI effective. The first way is to ask it good questions. So you've mentioned prompt engineering, and all prompt engineering is asking good questions. And in the form of that question, putting parameters around what you're wanting the Gen AI to do. So you don't want to just say, find me all of the cases with intellectual property. You want to say, find me all the cases with intellectual property that were relevant to Louisiana in since 2019 in the area of oil exploration. You want to give it very good parameters, because the more parameters you give it, the more fine-tuned it goes to find your answer and response. So all prompt engineering is asking good questions. And some of us have played around with good questioning in the Gen AI space. If you've played it all with the free versions, getting it to write your grocery list in Shakespearean iambic pentameter. I mean, it'll do that. It's a weird outcome, but it will do that. And that's the kind of thing that's just fun, but it gives you a sense of asking questions and asking good questions. The other half of getting good results is teaching that model with the data that you want it to look at. So we all heard about the horrible example of the guy that, sent Gen AI to win his case in the courtroom, came in, cited a case, and the judge is like, that's not a real case. And it wasn't. Because Gen AI said, well, you need a case that had this kind of a finding, so I'm going to make one up, and it's Mary versus Jones in, the circuit court of such and such, and it never existed. But if you had said to it instead, I need all the cases that help this position in my case, and they must have an existing citation in the Superior Court of Louisiana, that would have yielded a very different result. It may have come back and said, we don't have anything on point. It may have come back with an answer that was valid, but what it wouldn't have done is make up a case that was completely, fictitious. So you kind of have to tell the AI what you're willing to put up with and what you're not. And it's mastering that sort of art of not letting it get out of line. It's those guardrails. But it also, you have to then train it and give it the data of that Louisiana Circuit Court. So if Louisiana Circuit Court cases are not part of the internet, then your Gen AI hasn't been trained on it. So you need to be able to give it a data set that gives it all of the case law from Louisiana Circuit Court. If you do that, then it will be able to narrow its findings to that data set. So this is where you're going to work with vendors and law firms and such that have trained these AIs for their space with specific data sets that you can then narrow your searching and capability against. So that's really what you're looking for. And that's a very valuable addition for a lot of different, what I'd call the niche applications. And niche could still be a very big market, but it's as compared to everybody's doing everybody's party planning, it's a little different. So
yeah, perfect. Thanks, Dan, for that. So I'm just going to look at the chat for a second. Jason, thanks for your comments, for enhancing discussion. We have one question before I go into my questions with Dennis Allen.
Yeah.
And what are the common accuracy thresholds for in-house legal trained LLMs powering special purpose chatbots and similar GAI use cases?
So what I've seen from the LLMs, and that's looking across the typical contractual work, so whether it's looking for clauses in a contract or risk elements in a body of documents, we're getting into the high 80s and low 90s for most of the LLMs, whereas the traditional and the legacy AIs were coming in anywhere between 50 and 70% in their typical search and look for measures. What we're struggling with a bit right now is that in order to use the LLMs, it's becoming expensive. So every token, you pay for the tokens that you submit for questions, and you pay for the tokens that the LLM has to read to populate your data set or to look at your group of documents. There's a balance to be struck between asking the Gen AI to answer the questions it does best and being satisfied maybe with answering other questions using more traditional AI or search methodologies that are more cost effective. So I think most of the vendors that are out there right now are struggling with that balance. They're trying to find the match between, is it cost effective to get that extra accuracy, or are we better off just having humans review at a lower level of accuracy because of the cost? So if you're going to get the high 90s, it's probably worth it. And the LLMs are getting better every day.
Yeah. Thanks for the question, Dennis. If there's anybody else has a question, if something resonated with you, please jump in. We've got about 25 minutes left, but I have a couple of other questions I want to jump in. Back to like use cases. Is there any path to pursuing more complex use cases without triggering bigger risks?
Yes, I think there is. One of the areas that the Gen AI is struggling with is redlining. And that shouldn't be anyone's surprise to the area that we've all worked with. It's the holy grail. Everyone wants somebody to be able to read red lines or to redline documents without having, or at least getting a reasonably degree of accuracy, particularly when you're dealing with the counterparty's paper. So it's a use case that the machines right now are still getting the hang of. It's a lot more complex to do that than to just find a topic. So it's an area where there's a lot of different AIs out there, or mostly within the CLM space, where the CLMs are going to want you to try this stuff. We're getting a lot of options, or we're getting a lot of partner inquiries, client inquiries to ask us, would we be willing to pilot the use case for them? So they would pick a segment of their business, come to a service provider like Integrion or one of our counterparts, and ask us to pilot the use of an AI in that space. And we're definitely embracing that because we believe that the Gen AI is definitely going to be altering our deliverables. I mean, people are going to be expecting service providers to be much more efficient and use this technology, whether it's in their environment or ours, to be more effective. So we are more than welcoming the opportunity to pilot these and keep the burden of dealing with the early generations of this away from the in-house legal teams, not to have to burden them with the training, with understanding the outputs, with being frustrated if the outcome isn't exactly what they were looking for. So using a partner to be able to test some of the more complicated use cases like the redlining is a great way to start.
And to add to that, Diane, another benefit of leveraging this module of relying on your service provider to test these use cases goes back to the prompt engineering, right? You don't want your internal teams to being the ones having to get training on how to ask these questions so you can have good answers, right? That's why we are actually also taking the lead on that and training our resources and us being the ones, getting the expertise so that we can provide the overall solution to clients and they don't have to worry not only about which technology or vendor they want to leverage, but also having to train their internal resources on how to actually use these systems to get the results that they're expecting.
Thanks, Patty. So what else have you guys noted that we should be mindful as we go forward with Gen AI realities for legal?
I think there's a number of different things to really be thinking about. First is some of this tech is arriving on your doorstep tomorrow in the form of a feature within your CLM tool or multiple features within your CLM tool. You need to be having the conversations with your vendors now as to how that technology is being deployed. What is it expected to bring to the table? How are your folks supposed to interface with it? Do you really want to turn it on for everybody and his brother? Or do you want to keep the permissioning to a certain group of folks that are going to control those questions and how things are asked? Really getting your governance model and your security understandings around that settled. Related to that is InfoSec. All of your CLM tools went through InfoSec reviews when they were implemented, but that was probably a year, 2 years, 3 years, 4 years ago. And your InfoSec teams may not be realizing that there is a brand new capability that's being introduced into that technology that is a whole different set of InfoSec questions for them to get their head around. So having an upfront conversation with your InfoSec team to say, hey, this AI stuff's getting introduced. What's our policy? What, am I allowed to use it? In what use cases? What are my constraints? and then really having that as a proactive conversation and letting those InfoSec teams meet with your vendors to understand what are they doing with the data? Do they have a proper enterprise license? Are there security measures on the transfer of information? Can your data be deleted? That sort of thing. Get all those answered, because they're not the usual questions that an InfoSec team would have asked. And I know we've had a couple of clients that their InfoSec teams have really struggled because they don't even know what to ask. So getting ahead of that conversation before it comes to bite you when you've got AI being used and something unexpected happens and everybody wants to know, where did this AI come in the door? Because it's probably there and you don't even know it. And then I think another thing to keep an eye out on is Microsoft. Not only are they investing heavily in OpenAI, but they're also looking at taking the Gen AI and embedding it deeply within the Microsoft Office 365 suite. So it will be a clickable insert into Excel to be able to write your behind the scenes calculations and such within the Excel frames. You'll be able to use it to generate your PowerPoint slides and get your content drafted. And you'll be able to use it for all kinds of work within Microsoft Word, as far as the red line capabilities, looking up content for your drafting. You need to be thinking about, where am I going to use all of this? Because a lot of that is also going to show up on your doorstep in the Office 365 suite. And I think it's going to disrupt a lot of how we think about applications across the legal space. Do we need as many? Can we pare it down? Is there really just a Gen AI and a document management system, and everything else can be done in those two things? I think there's a lot of big questions that are coming with the whole Gen AI space. And I think it's really exciting, but it's going to take at least a year, I think, to sort out. We recently had an event with our clients, and one of the questions we asked was, when did they think they would actually be deploying Gen AI actively? And the answers ranged from, I'm already using it, which was just a handful, to as much as 2 years out. And the really conservative organizations were really worried about the privacy issues, the security issues. The ones that were 12 months out, which was the most common answer, were just wrapped around their policies. They felt they could get there, that they would be useful, but that it was going to take a while to sort all that out, and that they were going to be wanting to do pilots in the meantime. So that it wasn't something we were going to launch tomorrow in big using ways. They might have turned on a small application for helping to craft office communications or something like that. But they were looking at a more measured and time spread out response, rather than turning it on tomorrow. So as much as there's pressure to get started, there's an amazing amount of balancing constraint that's going on. And I think this is going to be taking a bit to work itself through. And I think that's wise. There's a lot of great opportunity here, but as with anything, with great power comes great responsibility. And that's a balance that we're going to have to struggle with for a little bit yet.
Yeah, this is fascinating stuff, Diane and Patty. Yeah, just we have a question come in from Katish Dua, following up on the redlining use case through service providers. How are those internal departments feeling comfortable around security, privacy issues of the tools? Kind of address some of that. Are the service providers agreeing to take up more responsibility here?
So I do think that the service providers are willing to step up and take more responsibility. Also, depending on the application you use, you can apply the model without the data leaving it would reside still within the common cloud environment. So maybe if you're in an AWS or Azure cloud environment, your Gen AI would be deployed against that environment, and you'd be able to use it in that kind of a setting. But also, taking a look at the risk stratification, there's a big difference between giving the AI your entire corpus of agreements to look across versus giving them in-flight negotiation agreements, but particularly if it's a scope of work like NDAs or something similar, where you're testing out the application, but you're not really exposing serious content. You're not giving out your pricing sheets. You're not putting out things that are highly sensitive and risk adverse. You're picking a scope of work that you can test the use with relatively minimal exposure of client information or your own information, because it's a specific use case. So I think that's how it's going to get managed initially, while we all work out where does this data actually travel, and how's it being exchanged.
So I have a follow up on that, right? So it's like for the companies that are kind of looking at it and taking the risk right now and jumping in and using some Gen AI, like what is their thought process? Is there like an obvious ROI around jumping in and using like some Gen AI initiatives or legal service providers to help them with that?
I think the ROI question is going to be unanswered for a bit. And the reason I say that is because there's still a trade-off to be determined between, are these LLMs really saving that much time to what the licensing costs will be? And the licensing costs and the use cases for the licensing costs are only now being set up by the vendors. Even they don't quite know what their cost models are going to look like. So it's in a very early state for doing an ROI. I think it's going to be more about testing accuracy, testing security, and testing just comfort level, ease of use. I don't think we're going to be getting ROI type testing for a while yet.
Just going to throw it out there if somebody else has a question that they want to jump in with. Before that, I just wanted to kind of leave it with Diane and Patty to see if they have any last words for folks to think about when they're going on their journey for adopting Gen AI.
I think for adoption, the first thing to think about is there a scope of work that I could try this with that would not expose my largest and scariest contracts or my whole corpus of contracts? Is there a piece of work that I could feel relatively okay about with trying this? And then find a trusted partner that's using a mainstream application that's working with the big players in an enterprise kind of license, and try your use case so that you can get your feet wet in the application. I think it's great if everyone is using the $20 stuff at home to do their party planning. I think that's great. By all means, have it, book your next travel arrangements or whatever. Those things are out there. I think that's very cool. But until you actually get into the work setting, you're not going to learn the kinds of things you need to know. So I would start with segmenting your work, find something that you can do with relative assurance, and then partner with someone who's working in the right space.
And if I can add to that, echoing what you're saying, Diane, especially around partnerships, also a lot of investments have been made with CLMs, and Diane mentioned something around CLMs also looking to incorporate this technology now as part of their base technology. So a lot of companies already have their workflows and their processes and their contracts managed by these systems. So also talk to your vendor and understand what's the roadmap for them. What are they planning for adding this technology? Because it might be the case that you don't have to actually look for a separate vendor, or have to look for, a whole different solution. It will be more also around leveraging what your CLM vendor can also add on top of the solution that they are already providing to you.
Absolutely.
So we do have one more question, but I just want to ask you guys really quickly: Are you guys okay if people are at the beginning of their journey and they want to reach out for more information from both of you, how to kind of explore Gen AI and their departments?
Absolutely. Happy to hear from any of them.
Yeah,
Yeah,
sure.
I will share your information in a follow up with the recording. But Dennis is bullish, it seems here. He says building on that without ROI, how are you advising clients to gain buy-in?
So, because most of the pilots that we're looking at right now are fairly limited use cases, the return on investment, it's more experimental dollars. So you're not doing it across your whole line of business and having to generate a big impact with a lot of numbers associated with it. These are fairly finite. They're short term. They're relatively low cost, and so it's usually under the idea of investment dollars, rather than more so than an ROI. Because the ROI piece, I think until you do these pilots, you're not going to be able to calculate the type of an ROI to give it to your real environment. And I think once that's explained, the clients that we've talked to said, management sort of understood that you just don't have anything to work with to be able to say, yeah, it's going to save 20% of their time in red line work today because of the Gen AI. You can't possibly estimate that, and neither can your vendor or your provider. So it's having these pilots to say, let's see what it actually does. Is it going to be useful? And then using the data that comes from the pilot to extrapolate to an ROI for a bigger application.
Perfect. I think on that note, I think we'll end this. I just want to thank everybody for spending your time here today with us, and I want to thank Diane and Patty for. It's always my favorite session doing it with you guys. You have so much knowledge to share. Really appreciate you sharing the knowledge. I will follow up with a copy of the recording and both Diane and Patty's emails, so you can reach out. Looking forward to our next session together. Thank you.
Thanks, Colin. Appreciate having us.
Yeah, appreciate you guys. Thank you.